Welcome to About Easy English Podcast. I'm David, and today we're diving into a fascinating aspect of English grammar that helps us express how we do things.
And I'm Sarah. I'm really excited to join David today as we explore adverbs of manner, those wonderful words that add color and detail to our actions.
You know, Sarah, it's interesting how often we use these words without even thinking about it. Like how you just said you're really excited. That's actually an adverb, though not one of manner.
Exactly. And today we'll be specifically looking at adverbs that tell us how actions are performed. We'll make it simple, practical, and most importantly, easy to understand.
We've got a great show planned with lots of examples and practice scenarios that will help our listeners use these adverbs confidently in their everyday conversations.
And we'll be having a natural conversation throughout the episode, showing you how these adverbs fit seamlessly into regular English speech.
So let's start exploring the wonderful world of adverbs of manner together. Let's start with the basics. What exactly are adverbs of manner?
Well, adverbs of manner are words that tell us how something is done. They describe the way actions are performed, adding important details to our verbs.
Right. Think about the difference between just saying she walks and she walks quickly. That word quickly tells us how she's walking.
Exactly. And these adverbs help us paint a much clearer picture of actions. Instead of just saying he spoke, we can say he spoke softly or he spoke confidently.
You know what I find interesting? Most adverbs of manner answer the question, how? How did someone do something?
That's a great way to identify them. For example, if someone asks, how did she sing? We might answer beautifully or terribly.
And these adverbs can completely change the meaning of what we're saying. Like, he smiled happily gives a very different impression from he smiled nervously.
That's so true. They really help us communicate not just what happened, but the quality or style of the action. Think about how different the child played quietly is from the child played noisily.
I've noticed that in everyday conversation, we use these adverbs constantly. Like when we say things like, she carefully arranged the flowers, or he eagerly opened the present.
And they're especially useful when we want to give instructions. Like when a teacher might say, please write neatly, or listen carefully.
What I think our listeners should remember is that these adverbs help make our English more descriptive and precise. They're like the seasoning in cooking. They add extra flavor to our sentences.
That's a wonderful comparison. And just like seasoning, a little can go a long way in making our English more expressive and interesting.
Now that we understand what adverbs of manner are, let's look at some common examples we use every day. I think this will really help our listeners see how frequently we use them.
That's a great idea. Let's start with some morning routine examples. For instance, he quickly ate his breakfast, or she carefully applied her makeup.
Those are perfect examples. And at work, we might hear things like, the manager spoke firmly to the team, or the assistant efficiently organized the files.
Oh yes, and in social situations, we often use them to describe how people interact, like, she warmly greeted her friends, or he politely declined the invitation.
I love using these in sports descriptions too. The athlete ran swiftly, or the gymnast gracefully performed her routine.
And don't forget about how we use them in giving and receiving feedback. She patiently explained the concept, or he eagerly learned the new material.
You know what I notice? We often use these adverbs when describing emotions too, like he angrily slammed the door, or she happily skipped down the street.
Absolutely. And in customer service, they're essential. The representative professionally handled the complaint, or the waiter promptly served the meals.
Here's a fun exercise for our listeners. Try describing your daily activities using adverbs of manner. Like, how do you usually drive to work?
I'd say I drive cautiously. And how about how you typically respond to emails?
I try to respond promptly and professionally, though sometimes I admittedly write them hurriedly when I'm busy.
That's so relatable. And it's interesting how these adverbs can change the whole tone of an action. Compare he accidentally broke the glass to he carelessly broke the glass.
Exactly. The adverb completely changes our understanding of what happened. It's like adding a layer of meaning to the action. Now let's tackle something really important: how to actually form these adverbs of manner. The good news is that there's a basic rule that works most of the time.
Right. The most common rule is simply adding ly to the end of an adjective. Like quick becomes quickly, or careful becomes carefully.
Exactly. But there are some spelling changes we need to watch out for. For example, when an adjective ends in y, we change the y to I before adding lie.
Oh yes, like happy becomes happily and angry becomes angrily. That's a really important pattern to remember.
And here's another interesting rule. When the adjective ends in lay, we drop the E and just add Y. So gentle becomes gently.
Don't forget about adjectives ending in IC. We add ally instead of just lie, like basic becomes basically, and tragic becomes tragically.
Now here's where it gets a bit tricky. We have some irregular forms that don't follow these rules at all.
Like good and well, right? We don't say goodly.
Exactly. Well is probably the most common irregular adverb of manner. We say she sings well, not she sings goodly.
And then there are some adverbs that look exactly the same as their adjective forms, like fast. We say she runs fast, not she runs fastly.
Right. Hard is another example. We say he works hard, not he works hardly. Actually, hardly means something completely different.
It's also worth mentioning that some adjectives ending in "ly" like friendly don't have adverb forms. Instead, we need to use a phrase like in a friendly way or in a friendly manner.
These exceptions might seem overwhelming at first, but with practice, they become quite natural to use.
Let's put all this into practice with some real-life scenarios. Imagine you're at a job interview. How would you describe the way someone should conduct themselves?
That's a great situation to explore. In a job interview, you'd want to speak confidently and answer questions thoughtfully.
Absolutely. You might say something like, the candidate presented herself professionally and responded intelligently to all questions.
And here's another common scenario: giving directions to someone. You'd want to explain things clearly and speak slowly, right?
Yes, like, could you please speak more slowly? I'm having trouble following the directions. That's a perfect example of using adverbs of manner in everyday situations.
Let's try something more casual. How about describing someone dancing at a party?
Oh, that's fun. You might say, he danced enthusiastically all night, or she moved gracefully across the dance floor.
And in sports, we use these adverbs all the time. The runner moved swiftly around the track, or the gymnast landed perfectly.
Here's a good one, describing how someone performs their job. You might hear, she efficiently organized the files in a formal context.
Or more informally, he quickly threw together the presentation, or they worked frantically to meet the deadline.
In social situations, we often use these to describe how people communicate. Like, he spoke softly during the movie, or she laughed loudly at the joke.
And don't forget about how we describe daily activities. The children played quietly, or he angrily slammed the door.
These examples really show how versatile adverbs of manner are in both formal and casual situations.
Now, let's talk about some common mistakes people make with adverbs of manner and how to avoid them.
One of the most frequent errors I see is when people confuse adjectives with adverbs, like saying, he did it quick instead of, he did it quickly.
That's right. A helpful tip is to remember that when we're describing how an action is done, we usually need to add /ly to the adjective.
Another common mistake is using good instead of well. For example, people often say, she sings good when it should be she sings well.
Here's a simple memory trick. If you're describing an action, use well. If you're describing a thing or person, use good.
Here's a simple memory trick. If you're describing an action, use well. If you're describing a thing or person, use good.
One final tip. If you're unsure whether to use an adverb, ask yourself, how was the action done? The answer will usually need an adverb of manner.
Well, we've covered quite a lot about adverbs of manner today. Let's quickly recap what we've learned.
Yes, we've seen how these important words help us describe the way actions are performed, and we've learned the basic rule of adding lie to adjectives to form most adverbs of manner.
We've also covered those special exceptions like fast and well that don't follow the regular pattern.
And don't forget all those practical examples we discussed, showing how adverbs of manner are used in everyday conversation.
I hope our listeners have found today's episode helpful. Remember, practice makes perfect when learning any aspect of English.
Absolutely. And speaking of practice, in our next episode, we'll be discussing prepositions of place, another fascinating topic that will help you improve your English skills.
Thanks everyone for listening to About Easy English podcast. Keep practicing, and we'll see you next time.